we all understand the type of climate that we're dealing with. We're dealing with multiple offer situations.
I'd love to know sort of what's your why? What makes you tick? Why are you so successful?
Have a dialogue with your lawyer. Have a dialogue with your agent.
Both sort of passionate about sort of what we do.
Again, vet your agent to make sure that they're experienced and they're local. I like that idea.
No excuse to miss it on Saturdays from 8 to 9.
That's right.
WBZ.
And now, the show that gives you the latest and most relevant housing market news. Real Estate Radio Boston with financial expert Rick Shearer and legal professional Ali Alavi.
We want to welcome in studio
Ellen Shapiro.
Henry Goodman.
Yeah, from
Goodman, Shapiro, and Lombardi. What's going on? How are you guys?
We're fine, thanks, and thank you for having us.
No problem. Listen, we promised the listeners sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about representation on condos.
Very quickly. Recently, something came to my attention that makes me want to reiterate something that we've said before.
Okay.
Sort of like a commercial, you might say, for conveyancing attorneys, but at the same time, very, very important. And that is that when you're going to buy a condominium unit, don't just hire an attorney to review the purchase and sale agreement and attend the closing. Make sure they review your documents and what's in the title. Recently, I came across a situation where a municipality had an agreement with a condominium developer, which was passed on to the unit owners obliquely in the condominium documents. It was just hidden there, but they're going to be surprised, a lot of them, to find out that in just a few years, they're going to have to come up with an average of maybe $50,000 apiece.
And when you say a few years, you mean after the developer is long gone. The developer is gone.
So let me just back up. Let me just back up for a second. This information was found inside the condominium docs.
It was hidden in the condominium docs by a brief allusion to some other document that's on record at the Registry of Deeds.
So in the condo docs, there was a reference to this other document that was of record.
Yep.
And that other document that's of record essentially binds the board or the association to the terms of that particular agreement. And that particular agreement down the road is going to expose the association to thousands of dollars.
So a good
That's
attorney
crazy.
who's representing a client in a condo transaction needs to represent the purchase and sale, but also needs to go through the condominium docs, soup to nuts, and if anything is sort of referred to as recorded, they need to go one step further?
Absolutely. And the point is that what they should do when they're hiring an attorney like Ali Alavi here, for example, they have to give them enough leeway to make certain that they investigate what the documents mean, what they say, and to advise them not merely on whether or not they're getting a title, but what they're buying into. If they want to accept what they're buying into, fine, but they should be educated. Don't come back later and say, I hired a lawyer for just a couple of $100 to do the closing,
right?
And why didn't he tell me about A, B, C, and D?
Henry, is this a brand new condo conversion?
This is a brand new development.
Brand new
in this
development.
particular case, but it doesn't matter.
Right, but no, I understand it doesn't matter. But the question that I want to pose is, does the seller, let's say it's an already existing association, does the seller have the obligation of disclosing this to the buyer?
It's in the documents. Theoretically, you're supposed to know what's in the
Buyer
documents.
beware.
Gotcha. So it's part of the due diligence that the buyer has to go through. So really the take-home message here is that if you're planning on purchasing a condominium, hire competent counsel to not only negotiate the purchase and sale, but really dive deep into the content of the condo docs to be able to unravel any hidden issues that may exist.
That's right. In most condominiums, there won't be any, but in some of them, you'll find that there's a problem just like this.
Yep.
And so you want to be sure that you know what you're buying.
So we don't want to scare anybody. We just want the take-home message here is make sure your attorney is doing their job, and if they're not looking at the condominium docs, just make sure that they do.
Exactly. And if you're thinking about buying a condominium, you also need to be prepared for sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Let's talk about that.
Alan.
Okay. Now that everybody is paying attention, now that you're in the condominium, are you going to be exposed to sex, drugs, and rock and roll? Well,
one would hope so.
One would hope so.
I'm just kidding.
Okay, that was our leader. Now, moving along. Okay, I wanted to be humorous and get everyone's attention, as I said. But the fact remains that these are serious issues that arise on a daily basis in condominiums. And the overriding theme here for these three different topics is, what is a board supposed to do? Now, many of our listeners may be board members. Maybe they want to run for the board, and they're not aware that they're going to have to deal with these problems.
Sure.
And it becomes a serious issue. These are not hypothetical cases. With respect to sex, the issue, and I certainly, although I introduced this with some humor, this is not a funny topic. We all agree that we don't want sex offenders living close to children. We probably all agree, unless you're married to the sex offender, that we don't want them living in our neighborhood or in our condominium unit or next door to us. Now, there is a case
Now, I remember last time that you were here, you talked about a scenario whereby I think the association sort of broadcasted an owner as a sex offender, and in fact, they weren't.
Correct.
And the only crime that I think they had committed was...
had the same name as the sex offender.
Right, which is crazy.
Exactly.
And that exposed a massive amount of liability on the part of the association.
Right, no pun intended with the use of the word exposed. Okay, but the fact remains that this is serious. And right now, there's a case in Texas that's working its way through the system where a man, and this was really an unusual set of facts, he had been convicted, he had been incarcerated, he had served his time almost 20 years ago. He was later found to have failed to register as a sex offender. He went to jail for that. He comes home to the unit that his wife owns, and on the door is a notice. Oh, by the way, we've passed a rule, no sex offenders in the community, if not sex offenders, but anyone who's required to register as a sex offender.
Wow.
Anyone who's required.
Wow.
And that can include, at least in Massachusetts, someone who might have gone to a Patriots game and had a little too much beer and couldn't find a restroom on his way home, so stopped on the side of the road.
Right.
So that is a very, very broad statement.
Sure.
So now they made this man, they said to this man, you've got to get out of here. And you can't be within 2,000 feet of children in this complex, when the state law only required him to be 200 feet away. Well, what happened? He's suing the association's defending, he's claiming federal rights violated, the 14th Amendment, no due process, yada, yada, yada. Actually, the case was supposed to go to trial the end of March, and I just saw this morning that there's some sort of settlement in the air, and there's a report due back to the judge the end of April. So if you invite me back, I will tell you what happened with that one.
So if anybody is out there buying property, it doesn't have to be a condominium, but you can go to the state's website. You can Google Massachusetts sex offender list. You can go and check that out.
Right, exactly.
Right, and I want to just say this. I mean, why should the listeners listen to Ellen and Henry? Ellen and Henry are part of Goodman, Shapiro, and Lombardi. You guys essentially represent 800 associations.
Give or take.
Give or take. But you have tremendous amount of experience and insight in this. Now, let's talk about, we've covered this topic in the past, and this topic is obviously the medical marijuana, and we're sort of segueing into the drugs aspect of things.
Correct.
So I'm in a condominium, I live in this condominium, and the guy next to me, by right, according to state, can smoke or even grow his own marijuana. What's an association or a board to do?
Well, I'll tell you, it's funny that you say that. I just had a phone call from a property manager this week, and she said to me, Ellen, the neighbor next door, the unit owner next door, is complaining that there's a smell of marijuana coming from the next door unit, and she wants the board to do something. So my first question, I said, well, why don't you ask her how she knows what marijuana smells like? And,
Well, I think we all went to college, or most of us.
I'm not
even
going
high
there.
school.
You can talk about yourself. I'm not addressing that.
That's right.
So,
I don't know
interestingly,
what it smells like.
I don't know if the property manager did that, but we've never heard from this unit owner again.
Gosh.
So it's an interesting question as how the complainant, if you will, is going to establish this. But seriously, you raise a tough point for the boards. Are they now going to become agents of law enforcement? What are they going to do about the medical marijuana issue? And this is the really serious one.
Right.
Whatever you may or may not think about the use of marijuana for recreational purposes, medical marijuana gives it a much different dimension.
Well, why don't you tell them, Ellen, about whether or not the board can suggest to the unit owner that's smoking medical marijuana that they ought to take it in suppository form.
Okay, well, we didn't have to go quite down that particular road, but since we're ending up there anyway, I will jump in and discuss that.
That's not as fun.
It's available.
I'll be honest with you.
It's available.
Okay, I have to go through this quickly because I'm running out of time, and if you invite me back, I'll talk more.
Yes.
There's a hot topic of discussion with condominium attorneys. Can you require a unit owner to take marijuana, ingest it in a form other than smoking? It's back and forth. There's some medical evidence. Yes, no, it may have a less palliative effect. Nobody knows. And as I say to my boards all the time, how are you going to manage to get through this minefield of potholes?
Right.
Okay, bad joke, but I couldn't resist. I'm sorry.
Well, we're going to have you guys back on in a couple of weeks, so let's finish up with the rock and roll at that point.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
All
Yep.
right. I'm more than happy to.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Guys, thank you
Alan,
so much.
Henry, thank you.
Thank you.